There's a black carbon powder that is quietly taking over the gardening world right now. It's ancient, it's fascinating, and if you believe a lot of what the internet is telling you, it's basically magic. Dump it in your soil and your plants will explode. Mix it in with your worm bin and your worms will thank you. Charge it, inoculate it, and suddenly you've got some kind of supercharged black gold amendment that solves everything. But here's the problem with all of that. Some of it is true, some of it is partially true, and some of it is just flat out wrong. I'm Sonny from Sunnyside Soil, and today we're going to do what we always do. Cut through the noise and actually look at what the science says about biochar. What it is, what it does, what it doesn't do, how to prepare it correctly, and this one's important, why you should absolutely keep it out of your worm bin. Let's get into it. Before we talk about what biochar does, let's talk about what it actually is, because a lot of people get confused about this. Biochar is charcoal, that's it, but it's a very specific kind of charcoal, made through a process called pyrolysis, which really is just a fancy word for burning organic material at high temperatures in a low oxygen or oxygen-free environment. That oxygen restriction is what makes it char instead of ash. Now, you can make biochar from wood, agricultural waste, bamboo, corn cobs, rice husks, really a lot of different feedstocks. It's the feedstocks that matter, by the way, because it affects the final structure and nutrient profile of the biochar. Now, here's what makes biochar interesting from a soil science standpoint. It is extremely porous. Under a microscope, biochar looks like a honeycomb of tiny chambers and tunnels. That surface area is enormous. 1 gram of biochar can have a surface area of several hundred square meters, depending on how it was produced. And that surface area is where all the real action happens. It's also where a lot of the misunderstanding happens too. Now, I want to address this directly before we go any further, because the hype around biochar has gotten genuinely out of hand in some corners of the internet. Biochar is not a fertilizer. It contains almost no nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium on its own. It doesn't directly feed your plants. If you're buying biochar expecting an NPK boost, you're going to be disappointed. Biochar is not compost. It does not really break down. It does not feed your soil food web directly. Microbes don't eat it the way that they eat organic matter. And biochar is not a cure-all. There is legitimate peer-reviewed research showing biochar can improve certain soil properties, but those improvements are highly dependent on your soil type, your climate, your feedstock, how the biochar was made, and critically, how it's prepared before you apply it. Studies from the International Biochar Initiative, yes, there is such a thing, and numerous university extension programs show that raw, unprepared biochar added to soil can actually reduce plant available nutrients in the short term, because that enormous pore structure will absorb the nutrients from the soil before the microbes and plant roots can get to them. So let's talk about how to actually prepare it correctly. When people talk about charging biochar, they mean preloading that pore structure with nutrients before the biochar ever hits your soil. Think of it like filling a sponge before you introduce it to the water you actually want it to retain. Raw biochar going into your soil is essentially a nutrient sink. It'll absorb the nitrogen, the minerals, and the moisture and not release them to your plants right away. That can actually cause a deficit in the short window after application. Now, this is well documented. Charging is the solution. There are a few common ways to do it. The simplest method is to soak your biochar in a nutrient-rich liquid. Compost tea, worm casting extract, diluted fish emulsion, liquid kelp, any of these will work. The idea is that the pores fill with biology and nutrients, so when you apply it to the soil, it starts contributing immediately instead of robbing from your existing nutrient pool. Another approach is to mix it directly into your compost or worm castings and let it sit there for a while before applying. But more on why worm castings work so well for this in just a second. So how long should you charge it? Most recommendations that I've seen and that are consistent with the research suggest at least a week of soaking or several weeks if you're using the compost burial method. Now, if all of this talk has got you thinking that charging and inoculating biochar is just way too much work, I actually got this biochar from our friends over at Build a Soil, where they will sell it to you pre-charged, so that takes all the work out of it for you. I'll leave a link in the description below where you can buy it. People use charging and inoculating interchangeably sometimes, and I understand why. The process can overlap, but they're actually describing different things, and that distinction matters. Charging, as we just discovered, is primarily about loading the biochar with nutrients. You're filling that pore space with soluble minerals, organic compounds, and some biology. Inoculation is specifically about introducing living microbiology into the pore structure. You're colonizing the biochar with beneficial bacteria, fungi, protozoa. Those are the microorganisms that are at the foundation of the healthy soil food web. When biochar becomes home to an active microbial community, it functions completely differently in your soil. It becomes a long-term habitat, a protective refuge where microbes can persist through drought, tillage, and temperature swings that would otherwise wipe out significant portions of your soil biology. Now, the best inoculants for biochar are things like finished worm castings, actively aerated compost teas brewed with diverse feedstocks. The practical difference between charging and inoculating? Well, charging is the quick soak in a liquid solution. Inoculation is letting living material colonize the pore structure over time. Now, in practice, the most effective approach is to do both. Soak the biochar in a rich biological liquid and then work it into a biologically active medium like compost or worm castings and let it sit. That combined approach, charged and inoculated, is what turns biochar from an inert carbon skeleton into something genuinely useful in your soil ecosystem. Okay, this one I feel pretty strongly about, so I want to be direct. There is a trend, and I see it in Facebook groups and in Reddit threads and on YouTube, of people adding biochar directly to their worm bins. Sometimes it's in fairly significant amounts, and I understand the logic. Worms process organic matter, biochar is a great soil amendment, so why not combine them? Here's why not. First, raw biochar is highly absorbent. It will pull moisture from your bin environment. Worm bins need consistent moisture, typically around 70 to 80% moisture content. Throw in a significant amount of dry, uncharged biochar, and you're pulling that moisture out of the bedding and out of the castings and potentially out of the worms themselves. Worms breathe through their skin, so they need the moisture. This is a real stress factor. Second is the pH situation. Biochar can be alkaline depending on how it was made. Worm bins operate best in a neutral pH range, roughly 6 to 7. Spiking the pH upward is not something that your worm population is going to thank you for. Third, and this one's subtle but important from a soil biology standpoint, raw, uncharged biochar in an active bin is going to compete for the very biology that you're trying to cultivate. It'll pull microbial communities into those pores before the worm's digestive process gets to work on them. Basically, you're robbing the worms of food. And lastly, depending on where you get your biochar, it could come in larger chunks that the worms just really can't break down, and that will cause a mess when it comes to harvesting your castings. Now, here's where the nuance is. Worm castings are actually one of the best materials you can use to charge and inoculate biochar after the fact. Mix fully finished harvested castings with your pre-charged biochar, let it sit for a couple of weeks, and you've got an exceptional amendment. But that's using castings to prepare biochar, not introducing raw biochar into your active bin. Look, if you want to experiment with it, and I totally respect that, experimentation is how we learn, use tiny amounts. We're talking like a light dusting, maybe a tablespoon per square foot of bin surface, and watch it closely. But I'd honestly just would recommend against it as a standard practice. Okay, great. So you've charged your biochar, you've inoculated it, you've let it sit. Now what? Application rates in the research vary quite a bit on this, but a commonly cited range for garden beds is around 2 to 5% by volume of your soil or growing medium. The best time to incorporate biochar is when you're establishing or refreshing a bed, working it into the top several inches of your growing zone mixed with compost or castings, rather than just surface broadcasting it. Now for no-till systems, which is how I usually run my beds, the approach I'd recommend is mixing your charged biochar into your top dressing compost before you apply it. Let that layer work its way down naturally over a season through worm activity and water movement. You're introducing the biochar into a biologically active carrier, and the no-till disturbance that stays minimal. Where biochar really shines as an amendment, and this is where the research is most consistent, is in sandy, low organic matter soils that struggle with water retention and nutrient leaching. The pore structure holds moisture and cation exchange capacity improves. That's real and it's meaningful for those soil types. Now, in a heavy clay soil, the benefits are a little less clear and really just sometimes minimal. In an already healthy loam with good organic matter, you'll see some modest improvements, maybe at best. Biochar is also genuinely excellent for sequestering carbon long-term. Unlike compost, which breaks down over time, biochar is extraordinarily stable. We're talking like centuries to a millennia of persistence in the soil. So if you're thinking about your garden's long-term carbon footprint, that's actually pretty significant. Okay, so let's bring this all together. Biochar is a legitimate soil amendment with real documented benefits, but it's not magic. It doesn't feed your plants directly, it won't rescue bad soil on its own, and raw, unprepared biochar can actually make things worse in the short term. The keys are preparation and patience. Charge it so you're not creating a nutrient sink. Inoculate it so you're introducing a living microbial community and not just an inert carbon structure. Use it at appropriate rates mixed into biologically active material and let it do its slow, steady work over time. Keep it out of your active worm bins. Use your castings to prepare it, not the other way around, and go in with realistic expectations. If you've got sandy soil with low organic matter and drainage issues, then biochar might genuinely change the game for you. If you've already got great living soil, think of it as a long-term investment, a slow addition to your soil's infrastructure, not a quick fix. That's my honest take, and really honestly, I think it's still a pretty compelling amendment when you use it right. So if you've been experimenting with biochar in your garden or in your worm bin, no judgment, I'd really love to hear what you've seen. The community conversations around stuff like this are some of my favorite parts of doing it. And speaking of community, we have a school group where we dig into exactly those kinds of topics. Soil health, composting, vermicomposting, amendments, we go into all of it. It's a great group of people who are serious about understanding the science behind what they're doing in their gardens, not just following trends. Link is in the description, so come find us over there. I'm active in that community and I'd love to continue this conversation with you there. And if this video helps you, hit the subscribe button where we put out new content every week. So we will see you in the next one.